the things that he's claiming in here are just wrong.
Hello, gentlemen. Today on Question Time, let's talk about an article that was sent to us by a client. And Joe, do you want to set the stage for what the article talked about?
Yeah, sure. It was an article in Politico with the title "Voters Were Right About the Economy. The Data Was Wrong." And the subtitle is "Here's Why Unemployment's Higher, Wages Are Lower, and Growth Less Robust Than Government Statistics Suggest." And it's written by a guy named Eugene Ludwig, who runs something called the Ludwig Institute for Shared Economic Prosperity. So let's talk about this. He makes some pretty wild claims here. He says that, for instance, and he's looking, I think, mostly at 2023 numbers. And I assuming that's just because that's the database he had where he had a full year. He maybe wrote this before 2024 was done. He says the unemployment rate in 2023 was 4.2% officially, but if you use his method, then you get actually 23.7% unemployment. There's a lot of different ways I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute about how he gets to that number. He also talks about median wages, which is average weekly earnings, which is included in the employment report every month. And you make that on an annual basis. It's $61,900 in the official stats, but he says it's actually closer to 52,000. And he does that by including part-time people in that number, which seems a little ridiculous since part-time people obviously aren't going to make it as much as full-time people. He also says that the CPI was up 4.1% in 2023, but in reality, the cost of living was up 9.4%. And he also discusses some disparities in GDP distribution. In other words, the economy grew at this rate, but who benefited? Was it everyone? Did everybody benefit equally? And of course, the answer is no. So let's talk about this for a second. Look, first of all, in some ways, he makes some good points here, but I think he makes them in kind of an exaggerated way. Uh, just to take the last one first, the GDP disparities. Look, this is the inequality argument that we've been discussing now for 20 plus years. The economy is not functioning the same for every person in the country, and it never does, by the way. But it has gotten more extreme over the last, say, 25 years, where a smaller group of people is capturing a larger share of the economic growth. But that's not new. And by the way, this guy doesn't offer any solutions to these things. He just points them out. And like I said, in kind of an exaggerated way, which I guess, he's trying to make a point. Maybe that's the way his way of doing it. I think it's a little dishonest, but whatever the case. Anyway, the point is the GDP distribution is never equal across the country, and it's never equal based on, for instance, a college educated person probably has gained more than a high school educated person over the last probably forever. I'm just going to guess on that one. So I don't think that's not that surprising. Uh, but he seems to be making a much bigger deal out of it. On the inflation numbers too, I want to just hit that one for a second. I don't know exactly what the average family, because there is no such thing as the average family. Every family is different. Did the cost of living go up 10% roughly, as he claims, in 2023, or did it go up 4.1%? I think anybody out there that thinks about it is they're going to remember the things that went up the most, put it that way. They're never going to remember the things that went down or didn't go up at all. They're always going to remember the things that went up a lot. So everybody knows that, for instance, car prices have gone up. Everybody knows that homeowners insurance prices have gone up. There may be legitimate reasons for some of these things. But to actually figure out what inflation is, I've said this many, many times. Listen, the CPI and the PCE, any measures of inflation that use an index like that, all they are is a government attempt to measure the value of the dollar. There's more direct ways to do that. And I would just point out that gold is close to 3,000 bucks an ounce, and that is not a good sign. So I don't know exactly what the inflation number is, but I would say this too. Whatever the inflation is, it is not just the fault of the Federal Reserve. It's not just the fault of government spending too much money. It is a combined effort to screw things up. And government has lots of levers to screw things up, and they seem to be pulling them all at various times. The unemployment rate too, he talks about that, if you include people that are working part-time uh, as essentially being unemployed, then the unemployment rate is 23.7%. Well, yeah, I got to tell you, if you start counting people how you want, and you want to make a point, you can come up with any number you want. We keep track of people that are working part-time. For economic reasons and non-economic reasons, soft business conditions and so forth. That's in the monthly employment report. We get that every month. It's not news. So is a quarter of the population actually unemployed? Yeah, I don't think anybody believes that. You can walk down the main street in your town and probably figure that one out, that that's not right. Could they be employed better? Maybe, maybe. That certainly would be nice. But maybe they don't want to be employed better. Maybe they don't want to work more. Maybe they can't work more because of some other reason, some non-economic reason. And I think trying to jam everything into one homogenous group is the problem here. And that applies to this guy as well as to the government. That's what everybody's trying to do. They look at aggregates and they don't look at individual situations. And so everybody's going to be a little bit different. But I don't know. I think the article is. I'm assuming he's just trying to, I don't know, shock people. I suppose is a good way to put it. It gets attention. There's a lot of things we need to be working on in the economy, and maybe some of these things are legit, but the numbers are just basically made up. So made up in a way in the right direction, maybe. I don't know, but they're still made up. We'll see how the economy evolves. I said this many, many times. Just watch the market. The market will tell you how the economy is doing. And if the economy is doing poorly, I guarantee you the market will let you know.
So, Steve, I think Joe's already answered my question, but to you, does it sound like this is just a case of making statistics say what you want it to say?
Oh, sure. Right away, I thought to the famous Mark Twain quote of "There's lies, damn lies, and statistics." And I also kind of get a smile from this article because it's kind of like, um, I'm going to make the point of why you shouldn't trust the statistics by giving you some statistics you shouldn't trust. And I think it does kind of pull that off. And I actually agree with that. I think that, you can torture numbers into making any point you want, and they are routinely tortured. And the way the media works is if it bleeds, it leads. If it's more extreme, almost everybody has a bias. So you shouldn't trust anything. You should dig deeper into the numbers on pretty much everything. So I think that should just be your first lesson. If somebody can summarize the economy in 4 paragraphs, no. No, there's a lot more going into just a simple number of unemployment, and you can go back forth and forth on workforce participation, who is and who shouldn't be in the economy, how you should be counting that. So, I think that's the first key point is dig deeper into the numbers, have an understanding of the numbers. Don't trust everybody. Everybody has a bias. But I do think there is another interesting point here that we've talked about. And that is kind of the divorce. There is a divorce between Wall Street and Main Street. There's a divorce between people with spending power and how much they have money. And sometimes the statistics focus a little bit more on them. And there's a reason for that. They have more power over the economy. And sometimes I think the folks more at the bottom rung who have less impact, who have less spending power, who have less capital deployed, get a little bit forgotten, which maybe matters more for politics and economics. But I do think. Yes. Have you had a wealth gap? Yes. Have you had issues with people at the lower end getting hit more with inflation when it hits foodstuffs and grocery bills and rent? Yeah, you do. Do you have an issue with those people's their wages not keeping up? With sometimes, recently post-COVID, maybe with more employment gains focused on people who actually aren't getting wage gains. And yeah, there's some really important issues here. I'd say principally around the wealth gap, principally around the power of labor versus capital and how it's been pushed a little bit more towards capital. And I think there's even some issues around how sometimes the numbers are calculated a little bit more around what matters to a multinational corporation in GDP growth than maybe what it does to somebody with just a high school or below education and the world they live in. Maybe this article does something by raising these issues, but kind of comes back to bad numbers make an extreme point to counter extreme points. I think there's an interesting discussion here, but I don't think this article really gets to it. But I think that interesting discussion is largely around the wealth gap and the power of labor versus capital that we're going to continue talking about.
Joe, it sounds to me like something that's been said over and over and over, not just about this, but in life. Don't be the sheep, be the shepherd. Get out there, know what's going on, do your research. Don't take anything at face value.
Yeah, here's some advice I got a long time ago, which was when you read an article, you see an article like this, it's provocative. Think about this. Why am I reading this now? And not only why am I reading this now, but why am I reading this now in this publication? So is it coincidence that we get an article that essentially vindicates or kind of reinforces what the Trump administration is trying to sell? Well, no, not when he's also talked about how Politico is anti-Trump. So is Politico publishing an article that maybe reinforces some of Donald Trump's points because they want to score some points with Donald Trump? Wouldn't be shocking to me. My point is, be careful about what you read and where you read it and when you read it. Well, like I said, always ask yourself that. Why am I reading this now? Why am I hearing this now? And like I said, where you're reading it, where you're hearing it, that maybe makes a difference too. So listen, like I said, I try to use the most independent source I can, which is the market. If the economy is going to hell, the bond market's going to tell me about it. And so is the currency market. Because those people don't have politics. They don't care about politics. They're just trying to make a buck. And so I think that's where you get your best information. But just be careful what you read and where you read it, and take everything with a giant grain of salt.
And we're always watching these things. So if you'd like help with your portfolio, let us know. Here's the email address.